there's a stream gauge station that's been active since about the 1950s. I don't know if we have...
The laser point is in the middle.
Gotcha. Okay. So this top graph kind of shows us the stream flow trend since the 1950s. You see a lot of ups and downs, but this blue line gives us the kind of median long-term trend. So it's about 3 CFS, so there's not much stream flow. Typically, as we all know, it goes dry most of the time. As we move down to Cibolo Creek near St. Hedwig, we start seeing more of the flows from groundwater contributions. It bumps up to 36 CFS. There's also a stream flow gauge in Martinez Creek, near the outlet of Martinez Creek. That's about 39 CFS as well. And finally, Sutherland Springs, Cibolo Creek at Sutherland Springs, on average, about 93 CFS. And then once we get down to Cibolo Creek at Falls City, which is near the outlet at the lower San Antonio River, talking about 120 CFS. And then jumping into water quality, to give you all a little bit of background about water quality and kind of what sets up the reason we're here. The Clean Water Act is the primary federal law that governs water pollution, and it tasks the US EPA with overseeing water quality across the country. The US EPA kind of delegates the responsibility of overseeing water quality to individual states. So the states are responsible, in our case, TCEQ is responsible for establishing those water quality standards and monitoring water bodies to ensure those standards are met. And so in our case, San Antonio River Authority, through that Clean Rivers program, does a lot of the monitoring within this watershed. And finally, the water bodies that don't meet those established water quality standards are listed on that 303D list. So that's kind of that term, that scary term that folks don't like to hear, but any water body that doesn't meet those standards or actually all water bodies are reviewed every 2 years or so, and a 303D list is put out that lists all the water bodies in the state that don't meet the existing standard. It's also important to discern the different types of pollution sources. So point sources or end of pipe discharge is kind of traditionally what we think about when we're thinking about pollution. So an example of this might be discharge from a wastewater plant or industrial discharge. Those are regulated sources. So those plants are required to get a discharge permit through TCEQ, and they're permitted to discharge a certain amount at a certain concentration of pollutant per day. On the other hand, we have non-point sources. So this is kind of what we're thinking about with runoff. Anything that's a really diffuse source that you can't really point your finger at. Now there are different types. So we do have regulated non-point sources. So some cities, larger cities, may fall under what's called an MS4 permit. So if it's a really dense, highly populated city, they're required to get a permit for those stormwater discharges, as well as certain industrial sites, construction sites, and stuff like that are required to get permits to manage their stormwater runoff. And basically all other runoff is non-regulated. So there's no permit. For folks that are landowners, for most of us, we're not regulated as far as the discharge coming off our land. As I mentioned earlier, the state is required to establish water quality standards. In the case of bacteria, standards are based on a designated use for that water body. So specific to bacteria, we use what's called a contact recreation use. The idea is that different water bodies see different types of recreation. The risk for folks to get into a water body and happen to ingest some water that has bacteria in it differs based off of what those uses are. So the state has established 4 levels, 4 different use levels: primary contact recreation, secondary contact 2, and non-contact. With each of those, you see an increasing level of E. coli concentration that's permitted. Within the Cibolo Creek, we're talking this primary contact for recreation is the existing standard. So it's required to meet this 126 CFUs per 100 milliliters. Now, we know what the standard is, but why in the heck are we measuring it? Well, E. coli is a bacteria that you've probably all heard of, but basically it's kind of found everywhere in the environment. It's found in food, it's found in the intestines of people and animals, it's found in the environment. So if it's kind of found everywhere, why do we measure it? Well, importantly, it's an indicator of the presence of fecal matter within a water body that's from specifically warm-blooded critters, basically anything with feathers, fur, or hair. And the presence of that fecal matter indicates, a potential risk for pathogens to be present, so those things that you don't want to get sick from. How does it get into the streams? Either two factors, either natural, there's potential natural factors such as wildlife that was mentioned earlier, runoff that transports wildlife manure to streams, as well as existing bacteria that's already in the stream. And when we have those high flow events, sometimes it gets resuspended and kicked up in the stream during those high flows. Those more unnatural factors might include pet waste that gets transported to the stream, livestock manure, failing septic systems or OSSFs, sanitary sewer overflows from those municipal storm treatment systems, as well as some direct loadings from those permitted discharges as well. Now, we kind of discussed earlier some of those existing trends or existing impairments due to bacteria within our watershed. Kind of the big areas that are highlighted, the Cibolo Creek tributaries, 1902A, I should have put the tributary names on here, but 1902A01 is Martinez Creek, and that one has, over the last few years, has a concentration that's over 300 CFU per 100 milliliters, as well as Clifton Branch, which is 1902C01. To give you an idea of what the water quality looks like on a map, as well as the existing water quality trends, starting at the bottom of the watershed, this is the confluence with the lower San Antonio River. Moving upstream towards Livernia is what's shown on this map. Kind of the take-home message from those four plots, those are showing all of the bacteria samples that have been taken through the Clean Rivers program, as well as the trend. Most of the trends actually are pretty close to that water quality standard that we're looking at. So there are some manageable reductions to be seen here. This next slide kind of moves up the watershed closer to the upper Cibolo Creek, as well as Martinez Creek and Salatrio. The main area of concern, as mentioned earlier, is Martinez Creek, where we've seen fairly high concentrations, around 300 CFU per 100 milliliters. Currently, that's not on that 303D list from the 2014 listing because there was not enough data to go through there, but it does indicate that there's higher concentrations there. The next water quality standard that I'm going to talk about is dissolved oxygen. These dissolved oxygen standards are based off of what's called an aquatic life use level. And so that's based off of the types of aquatic organisms that one would expect to live within a certain water body. So they've been broken down into exceptional, high, intermediate, and limited. Within most of the water bodies within the Cibolo Creek watershed, we're talking about a mean dissolved oxygen level of 5 milligrams per liter, or a minimum of 3 milligrams per liter. So, as most of y'all know, dissolved oxygen is kind of essential to the life of all those critters that live in a water body. So, essentially, this is just a measure of the actual amount of oxygen that's dissolved in the water. And obviously, the critters, the fish, the benthic organisms, the insects, and such, just depend on that normal dissolved oxygen level to survive. And there's different things that can cause dissolved oxygen levels to fluctuate within a water body. Kind of the more natural things that you see are going to be those daily and seasonal changes due to changes in temperature, sunlight, and vegetation. So when it gets warmer and that water body starts to get warmer, it can't hold quite as much oxygen as colder water does. Increased sunlight can help, warm up the temperature, as well as increase or stimulate vegetation growth. So when you get excess vegetation growth, as that organic material starts to dissolve, it actually kind of consumes the dissolved oxygen within the water body. Also changes or decreases in the turbulence or decreases in the depth can cause dissolved oxygen to indirectly start to decrease as well. Touching on that vegetation, increased organic matter that enters the stream can also contribute to decreased dissolved oxygen. And removal of riparian habitat, so those trees and brush and shrub that grows along the stream bank that helps shade during the days, that can indirectly lead to increased stream temperatures and increased dissolved oxygen, decreased dissolved oxygen. Largely, dissolved oxygen looks pretty good, within the Cibolo Creek watershed. So as I mentioned earlier, we're looking at kind of a mean of 5 milligrams per liter as that minimum level that you want, or a minimum of 3 milligrams per liter. The main water body that we see some concerns with is Clifton Branch right up here up the road. Mentioned earlier that there's an impairment for that 24-hour minimum dissolved oxygen in mid-Cibolo Creek. That has actually looks pretty good with the most recent 24-hour minimum dissolved oxygen measurements, and so that's not too much of a concern. But Clifton Branch, where we have where the grab samples have been occurring, has stayed below that 5 milligram per liter threshold that we want to get above. And finally, I'm going to touch on nutrients. So currently there's no numeric water quality standards for nutrients in streams within the state of Texas. There are screening levels for total phosphorus, orthophosphorus, ammonia, nitrate, nitrogen, as well as chlorophyll A. And those screening levels are used by TCEQ to indicate potential areas of concern or places that there might be issues. And those concerns are identified whenever sampling exceeds that screening level 20% of the time. And so, as I mentioned, we have all these different parameters as well as different screening levels. If you're kind of interested in how those are developed and what they are specifically, there is a link for that documentation by TCEQ up here. So importantly, what are nutrients? So nutrients basically plant food. In this case, I'm going to kind of talk about total phosphorus and nitrate. So we measure it because specifically that increased nutrient levels can lead to excess plant and algae growth or plant and algae blooms. When that stuff starts to decompose, it starts to eat up the dissolved oxygen within the water body. So there's a few factors that can contribute to different nutrient levels. So surface runoff, erosion, as well as spring flows can bring in nutrients that are attached to your sediment as well as within the groundwater into the water body. Also seasonal aquatic plant growth. As plants start to grow, they eat up the nutrients. As they die, they start releasing nutrients. The human factors that contribute to nutrients, things like fertilizers that are carried off in runoff, manure, faulty OSSFs. Whenever we have those rain events and carry off this runoff within the stormwater, we can see elevated nutrient levels as well as direct loadings. So there are permitted nutrient levels for those wastewater treatment plants. Specifically, the elevated nitrate levels, we've seen issues within mid-Cibolo Creek as well as some of the tributaries, and then the upper section of lower Cibolo Creek is seeing some issues. Total phosphorus kind of follows a similar pattern with those same water bodies. This map is showing mid Cibolo Creek as well as Martinez and Salotrio Creek. And this just kind of shows us those long-term trends. Those are largely, except for mid Cibolo Creek, have been kind of hovering right around the screening level. And then mid Cibolo Creek has kind of seen a higher level. So I think there's some ongoing work on trying to understand, what's contributing to that. Bumping over to phosphorus, we see something similar, except Salotrio Creek in particular, we see kind of higher levels on total phosphorus. So I just kind of threw a lot of information at you, but to kind of summarize it up really quickly, we have ongoing primary contact recreation impairment in the lower Cibolo Creek as well as Clifton Branch that's attributed to excessive E. coli levels. We have a concern in Martinez Creek due to E. coli bacteria. Dissolved oxygen impairment in Clifton Branch. Improving dissolved oxygen levels within the mid Cibolo Creek. And then nutrient concerns that are based on this TCEQ screening levels in mid Cibolo as well as portions of lower Cibolo, Martinez Creek, and Salotrio Creek.
You have time for questions.
Okay, if anyone has questions, I threw a lot of stuff at you, so you definitely have some time to answer a few things. Yes, sir.
When y'all pull sample this Clifton Branch, do y'all just pull them out of the river, or do y'all pull the shad and Clifton Branch? See if the problem's coming up from Clifton Branch or out?
There,
Can you repeat the question?
do you mind, Chuck?
We have to do, trying to get something below, at, and above.
Y'all pull it out of Clifton Branch. Y'all have those on that?
I don't have them available tonight, but I can definitely put something together. Provide. But for bacteria, dissolved oxygen, or just bacteria. We got.
Is there a nutrient problem?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Nutrient,
Nutria?
are they becoming a problem?
I can't speak to that because I don't live in this watershed, but I don't know if we have folks that can speak to Nutria.
I mean, I'm just saying, we see more signage.
I have nutria, a lot of them. Oh,
Nutria, yeah. The red tooth critter. Yeah, I can't speak to what wildlife-wise, what that looks like, but they're kind of somewhat of an issue everywhere, so.
Well, they're kind of widening the rivers.
Right. Gotcha. Did any, yes, sir?
If I saw the slide right, it looked like the possum was a big contributor, is that right? The slide that showed possum is a big contributor?
That kind of goes back to that bacteria source tracking study. So it sounds like, yeah, possum, as well as a lot of other wildlife sources are a contributor to E. coli bacteria.
Was
So,
anything being done about the possums?
not officially.
I guess we need to buy an RV at 22.
It looks like a lot of
Right. Yeah, it's, so it's hard, I would say lumping all that wildlife together, importantly, when we're thinking about those management measures down the line, is something to consider when we're thinking about, the potential actions that we can take that actually do reduce bacteria levels in the river. Yes, sir.
I got a question for you. If these water quality samples are taken pretty regularly, I understand that there is a concern sometimes with the E. coli or some of the other problems. Is there any notification that, other than being on this website, is there any way to let the people know, since, some people do recreation in this water?
Yes, sir.
Be nice to
And
know
I'll
it's
have to pass it to Sarah to speak officially on what they do on notifying the public.
As far as notifying on the bacteria results, the stations that we monitor on a weekly basis, right now the only way is on that website, mostly for kayakers and those that recreate on the river, to make them aware of what the conditions are if they are planning to go out on the stream. but there's no active notification at this time.
Got another question. Since we do support the San Antonio River Authority through our taxation, is there any reason you can't put it in the local paper and let the people know what's going on with the sites?
I don't think there
I
is
mean, it couldn't be
any.
that expensive to notify the people in the paper.
That is certainly something we can look at. The issue that you'll have is that I think we take the sample on Wednesday, we get it posted by Friday for the weekend activities, and that's past the deadline for the publication. So if you're looking at it for that immediate weekend, the paper's going to be a little late. But if you're looking at it from more long-term knowledge and trends, that's certainly something we can take a look at.
It doesn't have to be a retailer. I mean, as of now, I don't think anybody has any idea.
No, that's something we can certainly do. And if y'all do take the local papers, we do at least monthly have a one-page insert that does talk about some of the activities of the San Antonio River Authority. Exactly. So, Rebecca, if you don't mind taking a note here, we'll tell our folks that put the material together for that maybe we can start reporting some of that information in there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Michael. So up next, we have Brian Koch with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board, who's going to talk about the specifics of the plan we're developing to address these water quality issues. Please.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to just give an overview of why we're here tonight, what we're doing, and the process, and kind of explaining some of the more the inside baseball, if you will, on some of this. But like Claire said, I'm Brian Koch, and I'm with the Texas State Soil and Water Conservation Board. And I work out of our regional office in Wharton, and yes, we cover this far this way. So basically, I think we've seen several maps. I think we know what the Cibolo Creek watershed looks like, especially starting up here around I-35 and then around Falls City, confluencing with the San Antonio River. Santa Maria. Okay, I'm sorry. That's why we're here. It's your plan, and we're in your watershed, so you feed us that information. So thank you, appreciate that. But our agency role, we're the lead agency in Texas dealing with or responsible for planning, implementing, and managing programs dealing with agriculture or silviculture non-point source water pollution. And that non-point source is like Michael described in his presentation, that basically runoff, any pollution that occurs in runoff water, and we deal with it specifically on agriculture lands. And we work with the 216 soil and water conservation districts across the state, and I did recognize a couple of local board members, one from Wilson County, one from Karnes County. If there's anybody else that I didn't recognize, I apologize, but thank those guys for coming out tonight. We, through the districts, we use their local knowledge to help develop conservation practices and to be put on the land to handle localized resource concerns. And we provide technical and in some cases financial assistance to the districts to carry out these programs. What is a watershed protection plan? And what it is, we're trying to address water quality issues across multiple jurisdictions. I think we're dealing specifically with bacteria, dealing with the contact recreation standard, and then dissolved oxygen. And so those are our water quality issues in multiple jurisdictions. I think we're dealing with Bexar, Comal, Guadalupe, Wilson, and Karnes counties. So that's multiple jurisdictions. And then, but our goal is to improve or restore or maintain good water quality and within the particular watershed. We're obviously focused on Cibolo Creek. These tools, what we're trying to do is leverage resources and efforts to help improve water quality, because as we know, there's not a lot of money just floating around, and it takes money to implement programs and stuff, and by leveraging resources, putting people's efforts together and combining efforts, it definitely goes a long way in making these things work. I want to remind, and this is probably the most important thing, especially if just coming from my end, is these watershed protection plans are voluntary. We can't come in and say, hey, you have to go fence your cows out, or you have to, pick up your dog waste or something like. We can't. There's nothing we can mandate out of these plans. We can suggest practices and bring in programs for people to voluntarily participate in the programs. But we want to prioritize the BMP implementation. And I'm sorry for the acronyms, but BMP is basically a best management practice. And what that is something specific dealing with a specific source. But the elements of the watershed protection plans, identification of the causes, we want to figure out where the bacteria is coming from. I think we have some help with the bacteria source tracking. That's definitely a tool we can use, but we're also going to look at land use and animal numbers, septic system numbers, and other things. But what we're going to do when we gather that information, we're going to gather it and then get your input on that, because like I said, you live here, you know this place. I'm coming from Wharton, a few of others are coming from College Station or other places, San Antonio, so we're not here living here. So what we do is get your input to figure out where it's coming from. Estimate of the load reductions. This helps us figure out how much of the certain load is coming, how much is coming from, wastewater, how much is coming from septic, how much is coming from cattle, how much is coming from feral hogs, so we can apply the different practices and the different levels of the practices in those areas. We want to describe the management measures that will be implemented. Those management measures are those BMPs or best management practices. And it can range from just education, just letting people know, hey, this is some things you can do on your property that'll help, or this is some things these small cities can do to maybe improve their water quality, or down to we've worked in the neighboring watersheds, actually bringing in voluntary programs for farmers and ranchers to build cross fence, put in water troughs, plant grass, just various practices. So we have a little bit of history in the area of doing some different conservation practices, but that's what those management measures range from. Also, we want to estimate the technical and financial assistance needed, because before part of a plan, you need to have a price tag on what you want to implement. Also, the information and education component, again, that can fall back to those management measures, but you want to have a good plan of disseminating your information and letting people not only know, hey, this area of the creek is above the water quality standard, and it might not be safe to swim here. So just be aware of those risks, and then also letting people know different programs that are available. Like I said, with this plan, we're putting in different programs to be made available for people to take advantage of, so they can help do their part to reduce whatever loading's coming off their area. Also, we want to schedule our implementation. We want to know, okay, in year 1 through 3, we anticipate that we can do this level of we can fix this many septic systems, or we can do this many conservation plans, or this many pet waste stations, or whatever we think our sources are. We want to schedule that out. Description of interim and measurable milestones. We want to make sure that we're kind of heading in the right direction, and we want to say, hey, we expect in 5 years to be at this level with this level of implementation. And then this set of criteria to use to see whatever the load reductions are being achieved. So we want to say, is what we're doing working? We want to assess that. And then a water quality component, a monitoring component to evaluate our effectiveness. How are we doing? But our watershed, our agency program, we provide guidance and technical assistance to the local stakeholder groups